My name is Corinne Holloway, and I am 71 years old. People who know me would call me steady, methodical, even a librarian by profession and by instinct. I spent most of my life arranging other people's stories, cataloging the details they'd forget, preserving what mattered. Since my husband Harold passed 6 years ago, the house has felt like a hollow shell, and I've grown used to long stretches of silence. That weekend in early spring, the silence was broken in the best way. My 2 grandchildren, Ellie and Graham, were with me at the family's cabin outside Asheville. The air smelled of pine and damp soil from a rain that had passed the night before. From the porch, I watched them chase each other between trees, their laughter sharp and bright, bouncing off the ridgeline. It was the first time in months I felt something close to peace. I was holding a mug of tea, letting the steam fog my glasses, when my phone buzzed. At first I thought it was a harmless notification. Ellie liked to tease me for still keeping the volume on high, like a teenager waiting for a crush to text. But this wasn't a reminder or a weather alert. On the screen was a message from an unknown number. Leave quietly. Don't tell them. For a moment I thought it must be a mistake, spam or some cruel joke, but the words landed heavy in my chest. The warning was stark. Without greeting or explanation, I looked up. Ellie had stopped to tie her shoelace near the cabin steps. Graham was perched on the split rail fence, shouting for her to hurry. Nothing about the scene felt threatening, yet the chill in my spine told me this message wasn't random. Someone knew I was here. With them, my hands trembled. I placed the phone face down on the table, but I couldn't stop my eyes from darting back toward it. As if the words would crawl off the screen and explain themselves, I told myself to breathe. The mountains had always been my refuge, a place Harold and I came to when the noise of the world grew too much. Now, even here, intrusion had found me. Ellie's laughter rang out again, and I forced a smile when she glanced back at me. She didn't need to see the dread gathering in my throat. Whatever this was, it wasn't for her or Graham to bear. I slid the phone into my pocket and stood, steadying myself against the porch railing. My mind was already reaching for explanations, and my feet, almost without decision, were preparing to walk toward the trailhead. I pressed a hand to my forehead and told the children I needed to stretch my legs, that the mountain air felt heavy and I might walk down to the store for some water. Graham groaned at the idea of leaving his game of tag, and Ellie asked if I wanted company, but I smiled and shook my head. Stay close to the cabin. I won't be long. The trail from our porch wound downhill in a series of switchbacks, pine needles muffling my steps. The birdsong was bright, ordinary, but my pulse was loud enough in my ears to drown it out. I kept touching the phone in my pocket as if the words might vanish if I didn't check them again. By the time I reached the gravel road, my mouth had gone dry. The small store by the trailhead was little more than a weathered wooden shack with a faded cold drinks sign. A man stood by the side porch, gray at the temples, his frame slightly stooped, but his posture alert. When I stepped into view, he raised a hand in greeting as though he had been waiting for me. Mrs. Holloway. His voice was gentle, carrying an accent I couldn't place. Yes, I kept my tone guarded. My name is Eduardo Morales. I manage accounts at Bellamy and Pierce, the firm your son uses. He lowered his voice. I sent the message. I should have turned away, should have demanded proof of who he was, but something in his eyes, the caution, the urgency, held me still. He pulled a folder from the worn leather satchel at his side and opened it on the porch rail. Inside were photocopies of documents I recognized in shape, if not in substance, pages from my estate papers, signatures that looked like mine, and a new filing labeled petition for guardianship. My breath caught. There are also pharmacy records, Eduardo continued quietly, slipping out receipts with my name printed across them. Refills for sedatives, drugs I had never been prescribed. I gripped the porch rail until my knuckles burned. The air seemed thinner, the trees pressing in closer. If Eduardo was right, someone had already set a plan in motion, one that painted me as confused, incapable, ready to be managed, and the hand behind it all was my own son. Eduardo slid one of the photocopied pages closer to me. My signature trailed neatly along the bottom, the same way I'd signed library checkout slips for 40 years, but the text above it was foreign, according to this version. I had acknowledged episodes of cognitive decline and requested that my son, Daniel, be given immediate authority over my finances and property. I stared at it until the words blurred. I never signed this. I whispered. They replaced pages after you signed the originals, Eduardo said, his tone steady, not dramatic. The cover sheet, the date, even the witnesses are copied correctly. But these clauses, he tapped with one finger, they are not what you agreed to. A memory flared sharp in my mind. 2 months ago, Daniel had appeared at my door with a stack of papers. He'd spoken with the same reassuring tone he'd used as a teenager when trying to borrow the car. Mom, we need to modernize everything after Dad's passing. The laws have changed. It's routine. I hadn't questioned him. I'd trusted him. I felt the porch beneath me tilt. He said it was just an update. Eduardo's gaze was sympathetic but unwavering. And these pharmacy refills, he added, holding up the slips. Sedatives, benzodiazepines, all billed under your insurance number. Do you take these? I shook my head quickly. No, only blood pressure medicine, and a mild cholesterol pill. He folded the papers back into the satchel with a careful hand. Then someone else has been ordering them in your name. My knees softened, and I had to grip the rail to steady myself. The pieces began arranging themselves in a grim order, the unexplained heaviness in my limbs, the sudden lapses when I couldn't recall a name or misplaced my keys, the afternoons when exhaustion rolled over me like fog. I had blamed age, grief, the long shadows of Harold's absence. But what if it was not natural at all? Images struck like lightning my daughter-in-law, Melissa, setting a steaming mug of herbal tea on my nightstand each evening when she visited, insisting it would help me sleep better. Her smile so polished, her care so eager, it had seemed almost a kindness. The taste had always been bitter, but I drank it anyway. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through my contacts. For a moment, I considered calling Daniel directly, demanding an explanation, but the folder on the porch rail told me everything I needed to know. Instead, I tapped the name of my neighbor back in Asheville, Janice Miller, a retired nurse who had watched my house whenever I traveled. If anyone had earned my trust, it was her. She answered on the second ring. Corinne, are you all right? I tried to steady my voice. I need to ask you something unusual. Do you remember a few months ago when Daniel had me sign some legal updates? There was a pause. Yes, you mentioned it when we had coffee. You looked uneasy even then. I told her what Eduardo had shown me, my words tumbling faster than I could arrange them. When I finished, the silence stretched before Janice spoke again, firmer now. Don't go back to that cabin. Corinne, not until you know exactly what's happening. I'll call a friend of mine in Adult Protective Services. They take this seriously. Her certainty steadied me, just enough to make the second call. Years ago, I'd helped organize estate planning workshops at the library. One of the guest speakers, an attorney named Margaret Doyle, had struck me with her clear-eyed compassion. I found her number still tucked in my phone. To my relief, she answered, and when she heard my name, Her tone warmed instantly. "Mrs. Halloway, of course I remember you." "What's going on?" I explained again, slower this time. Feeling the tremor in my chest, she listened without interruption. Only the scratch of a pen audible on her end. "First," she said when I finished, "do not return to that cabin without law enforcement present. Second, I'll file an emergency petition to freeze any asset transfers. That will buy you time. Third, I'll alert the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office. They can send a patrol to check on you immediately." The weight of her words sank in. It wasn't only suspicion anymore. It was procedure. A system larger than me was now in motion. Eduardo gave a slow nod, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. My phone buzzed again, this time not a warning from a stranger, but a notification that officers were already en route up the mountain road, for the first time all day. I let myself exhale. The phone hadn't stopped vibrating since Margaret filed the emergency petition. Each ring jolted through me like a hammer against glass. At first it was Daniel's number, then Melissa's. When I ignored them, the messages began. "Mom, you're confused. You've let some stranger scare you. Just come home. We'll sort this out together." Melissa's voice followed minutes later, syrupy and sharp all at once. "Corinne, you've always trusted me. Please don't let outsiders poison your mind. You've been tired, grieving. It's not your fault. But you need rest. We'll take care of you." Their words slithered into the quiet of the porch, twisting in my chest. I had read enough novels about manipulation to recognize it on the page. But hearing it in the voices of my own family felt like drowning with familiar hands holding me under. Then came a voicemail I almost couldn't bear. "Grandma, it's Ellie. Daddy's upset. He says you're not feeling well. I just want you to come back. We can make s'mores tonight like we planned." Her small voice cracked at the end, and I pressed the phone to my chest as if I could draw her closer through it. My breath hitched, and for a moment the resolve I had gathered unraveled. The only thing I wanted in the world was to take my grandkids in my arms and tell them everything would be fine. My thumb hovered over the callback button. Just hearing her again might soothe the ache. But when I reached into my bag for a tissue, something else fell into my lap. Harold's old leather wallet. The photograph tucked inside had been there for decades. Harold on the day we bought this cabin, grinning with sawdust in his hair, his arm wrapped tight around me. His eyes seemed to say the words he'd always spoken. When I faltered, "Steady, Corinne, hold your ground." The phone buzzed again, Daniel's voice spilling into another message full of urgency and false concern. I slipped Harold's picture back into place and closed the wallet carefully. My family's love had turned into weather stormy, unpredictable, meant to drive me where they wanted. But I would not step into that downpour. Not yet. By evening, the sky had folded into a deep indigo, the ridge lines sharp against the last light. A sheriff's cruiser rumbled up the gravel road, headlights scattering shadows through the trees. Deputy Harris, broad-shouldered and calm, stepped out and tipped his cap to me. "Mrs. Halloway will escort you back to gather what you need. You won't be alone in there." I nodded, my throat tight. Eduardo walked beside me, quiet as always, his satchel clutched close. Together we followed the deputies up toward the cabin. The porch lights were on. That small detail unsettled me. I had switched them off before leaving. Deputy Harris gestured for me to stay behind, while he and his partner entered first. A few moments later, the sound of voices carried through the door, sharp, raised, familiar. When Harris beckoned me in, my knees nearly buckled. Daniel stood by my desk, his hands rifling through a drawer. Melissa hovered behind him, clutching a stack of folders already pulled from the cabinet. Their faces froze when they saw me. "Mom," Daniel said too quickly, smoothing his expression into something between relief and annoyance. You scared us half to death. Why didn't you answer your phone? I could barely find my voice. What are you doing in my desk? Melissa stepped forward, her tone sugary but strained. We were worried, looking for insurance papers. In case in case something happened. Deputy Harris cleared his throat. These belong to Mrs. Halloway. We'll need you to hand them over. For a heartbeat. Daniel didn't move. His jaw flexed, eyes darting from the deputy to me. Then, slowly, he set the folders back down. This is ridiculous, he muttered. We're family. We should be helping her. Help doesn't come through deception, I said. Though my voice shook, the officers gathered the files into evidence bags. Methodical and quiet, Melissa's face reddened, her eyes glistening not with sorrow, but fury. She whispered something to Daniel I couldn't hear, her nails digging into his arm. The deputies guided me toward the door. Folders sealed and carried out. As I stepped onto the porch, I could still feel their eyes burning into my back. Stripped of their masks of concern, the night air was cold, and for the first time I realized the danger wasn't just paper and signatures. It was flesh and blood standing under my roof, willing to cross every line I thought unbreakable. The sheriff's office in downtown Asheville smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I sat at a long oak table, hands folded to keep them from trembling. Deputy Harris slid a paper cup of water toward me, and beside him a clerk arranged a recorder. Take your time. Mrs. Halloway, he said gently. Margaret Doyle arrived not long after, her presence steady as stone. She set down her leather briefcase and gave me a small nod. I've filed the petition for emergency protective orders. The judge granted a temporary restraining order. Daniel and Melissa cannot access or transfer any of your property for now. Her efficiency felt like oxygen in my lungs. Still, the weight of the moment pressed heavy. A detective handed Margaret a preliminary toxicology report. I caught only the bold lines at the top: benzodiazepines detected. My pulse thudded. Proof, in black and white, that the fog clouding my days had not been grief alone. When it was my turn to speak, the words stumbled at first. Then, like a flood breaking, the years came pouring out. I told them how I had raised Daniel after Harold's sudden passing, working nights at the library and tutoring students to keep us afloat. How I skipped vacations, wore the same winter coat for a decade, saved every penny so he could have a chance at a better life. I remembered his acceptance letter to Chapel Hill, the way I cried holding the envelope. I remembered helping him with his first down payment, writing checks with Harold's name still on them. Every sacrifice seemed to echo in that room as I explained what had led me here. A son who once clutched my hand, crossing the street, now forging papers to strip me of the life I had built. The detective's pen scratched across his pad, each detail recorded. Margaret listened with her chin lifted. No pity in her eyes, only a fierce concentration that told me she believed me. When I finished, my throat was raw. I pressed a tissue to my lips. Steadying my breath, the clerk clicked off the recorder, and silence settled like dust. For the first time, I wondered not just what Daniel had done, but how the courts would choose to see me, an old woman fumbling with her words, or a mother fighting to reclaim the truth. The courtroom in Buncombe County was smaller than I imagined, its wooden benches polished but worn at the edges. The judge presided with a calm expression that betrayed nothing. My son sat across the aisle, a navy suit too tight at the collar. Melissa beside him with her lips pressed thin. For a moment, I almost saw the boy I had raised, the child who used to press dandelions into my palm. Then he opened his mouth. "Your Honor," Daniel began, his voice smooth. "My mother has been declining for months. She's confused, forgetful. Now she's being manipulated by strangers who want her money. I've only tried to protect her." The words pierced me more sharply than any knife. Margaret rose with measured grace. "We submit into evidence the toxicology report confirming benzodiazepines in Mrs. Halloway's bloodstream. She has no prescription for these drugs. Additionally, here are pharmacy receipts under her insurance, all refilled without her knowledge." A murmur rippled through the room. The pharmacist, a soft-spoken woman in a gray blazer, testified next. She confirmed that Melissa had picked up the prescriptions, signing Corinne Halloway's name in a neat, false flourish. I watched Melissa's face stiffen, her hands twisting in her lap. Finally, a forensic analyst explained the estate documents, pointing out the inconsistencies, the subtle change in font, the copied signatures, the missing notary seal. His pointer tapped the page with cold finality. The judge leaned back, fingers steepled. After what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "The guardianship petition is denied. A temporary order remains in place to protect Mrs. Halloway's assets. Further criminal proceedings will be scheduled." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Across the aisle, Daniel's shoulders sagged. 2 deputies approached. The sound of handcuffs closing around his wrists echoed louder than the gavel. Ellie and Graham weren't in the room. The judge had ruled they'd stay with my sister-in-law until the storm passed. It was the right decision, but my chest ached at the thought of their confusion, their small faces searching for answers. As Daniel was led away, he looked back at me once, his eyes filled with something between anger and pleading. My heart twisted. He was still my son. Spring melted into summer before I allowed myself back at the cabin. The scars of that winter were still tender, but the mountains had a way of holding me steady. The ridges blue and endless beyond the porch. Ellie and Graham were with me for the weekend, under the terms of supervised custody. A social worker named Miss Carter checked in each evening, but otherwise it felt almost normal. Pancakes on the griddle, cards spread across the table, laughter echoing through the rooms. Their voices filled the spaces that silence had claimed for too long. Graham insisted on building a fort out of quilts in the loft. Ellie asked if we could plant wildflowers along the fence line. I said yes to everything, hungry to give them the joy I feared had been stolen. My health was stronger too. The doctors confirmed the toxins had cleared from my system. I no longer woke with that fog pressing down on my thoughts. Each morning, I walked the path behind the cabin, pine needles crunching underfoot, breath even and free. Finances, once precarious in my mind, were secured. Margaret had overseen every account, every title. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a woman at risk of losing everything with the swipe of a pen. Instead, I felt like the librarian I once was, order restored, knowledge intact, shelves neat again, with a portion of my savings. I funded a small program at the Asheville Library. We called it Silver Shields, designed to help seniors recognize the early signs of financial abuse. Workshops filled quickly. People wanted to talk, to share, to learn. Standing there in the reading room where I had once shelved novels, I realized my story might protect someone else. That thought carried more healing than any court order could. On the cabin porch that evening, Ellie leaned against me, her hair smelling faintly of sun and wild grass. Graham raced across the yard, chasing fireflies with a jar. I looked out at the ridgeline, its silhouette darkening against the last streak of light, and I whispered words I knew they weren't ready to hear yet. Love is welcome here. Control is not. The air was still, the mountains, listening. If family demands obedience instead of respect, do they still deserve the name?